Amrullah Saleh speaking to CNN News 18. Amrullah Saleh ji, namaste. Thank you very, very much for speaking to us.
I don't want to be part of that betrayal. We will fight. The Taliban were never under pressure in Pakistan. They used Pakistan as a support base. It wasn't the Taliban who won this war. It was the lack of political will in Washington which led this scramble to happen. We are in control. We are on top of the situation.
Namaste and welcome to The Right Stand. I'm Anand Narsimhan. One person, one leader in Afghanistan who stood up and remained resolute and continues to be so right through this episode of Taliban takeover, took the right stand and spoke to CNN News 18. Our investigations editor Manoj Gupta has to be credited for enabling and making this interview and this exchange happen, ladies and gentlemen. As the caretaker president of Afghanistan, constitutionally, Amrullah Saleh, who was the first vice president in the Ghani administration, spoke to us and very clearly called out Pakistan, not just for providing sanctuary, but saying it ably, openly supported Taliban. It armed them and equipped them. And this takeover that we see is because of two reasons. One, because the world did not stop Pakistan from doing what it did. And two, there was a lack of political will or something changed inside the White House, because of which an entire nation and because of that an entire region currently is in a state of flux. Listen into this interview. First up, let me ask you, did you expect the collapse of the Afghan state to happen in the manner that it did? And what is your impression of the manner in which the former President Ashraf Ghani left the country?
I don't think this is the right time to reflect on that massive tragedy.
I appreciate that, Mr. Saleh. But let me ask you this then. Who do you blame for the Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan and why? And what do you think will be the ramifications of Taliban's Kabul takeover, both for Afghanistan and for the world at large? Do you see Afghanistan and are you apprehensive that Afghanistan could become the breeding ground for terror?
It's very clear the Taliban were never under pressure in Pakistan. They used Pakistan as a support base. They were not having sanctuaries there. The whole of Pakistan was in the service of the Taliban. United States tried to incentivize the Pakistani cooperation to buy it. The more they paid, it more emboldened the Pakistanis to provide more services and more aid to the Taliban. So the issue of a nuclear state sponsoring terrorism and insurgency against our Western allies and the Afghan state was never addressed. The second reason is the Doha talks legitimized the Taliban. And the Taliban did not remain loyal to their words. They did not honor their commitments, and they fooled the whole international community. The purpose of the Doha office was to keep the international community divided, keep them hopeful for a peace process which did not exist, but they were investing on military conquest, and Pakistanis were backing them wholeheartedly, and it was an unwavered support. So that's reason two. Reason three, in the last 2 years, the Republic came under enormous pressure from our American allies. There came a time they blackmailed us. They said, if you either you release the prisoners or we will cut aid to you. We will decrease our military assistance to you. We will entirely cut it. And we said, are you sure these people do not end up back in the front lines? And their answer was no. whereas they all ended up in the front line. So it was not prisoner release. It was gifting the Taliban a division of highly radicalized fighters. And the fourth reason is there were people in our government who were not aware of the situation, who were taking everything for granted, and they were landed politicians. Anyway, again, it's not the right time to focus on that. But we cannot confine it to these four reasons. There are numerous reasons which led to this tragedy. The bottom line is NATO is gone, U.S. military is gone, but the Afghan people are not gone, and the Afghan people cannot be evacuated. Kabul airport is tip of an iceberg. The country has sunk into a tragedy. Known terrorist groups have taken over Afghanistan. Today, for example, a money launderer who was facilitating transactions between Al-Qaeda sympathizers and the Taliban has become chief of the Afghan governor of the Afghan Central Bank. Haqqanis are running Kabul, and needless to explain who the Haqqanis are. This is a shame, and this is a betrayal, and I don't want to be part of that shame. I don't want to be part of that betrayal. We will fight. We will fight until the enemy believes and comes to a conclusion that Afghanistan should remain Afghanistan and it should not become Talibanistan.
And there are many in Afghanistan who salute that spirit, who endorse that spirit that you've just espoused, Mr. Saleh, because we saw that on display across Afghanistan on the 19th of August when they said that they will not compromise on the flag. But let me ask you this. What do you think of the American attitude and behavior during this entire episode? Their sudden departure and leaving so many arms, ammunition, huge tranches of cash, and now reports suggesting that all these arms and ammunition has been taken by Pakistan to Quetta.
They are watching what they did on TV screens, and they are seeing how the world media is now dominated by negative anti-American headlines. United States is a civilization, it's a global power, it's the mightiest military power on earth, and we never wished them bad. But this shows a single wrong political judgment humiliates a superpower like the United States. It wasn't ever about the American military or about the American intelligence. It was the wrong judgment of the politicians, and I think they have started to pay the price for their wrong decision.
Yes, and in hindsight, there is no doubt that there has been gross miscalculation on part of the US as far as the Taliban threat and what they can do. But there has to be a certain amount of blame that has to be shouldered by the erstwhile government too. You were first vice president in the Ashraf Ghani administration. Why couldn't your officials assess what was happening on the ground?
If a superpower decides to go this way or that way, there's so little or nothing we could do to change their attitude or change their direction. I do accept that I have been a major player and I still continue to be a person of significance. But did we have any say in the U.S. decision? Did we have any say in the U.S. way of negotiations with the Taliban? No. Because they did take note of what we were saying, but we did not manage to influence their decisions. What is happening in Afghanistan, we have been warning them of these type of consequences for 2 years, but we were ignored, and they are paying the price. Afghans are paying the heaviest price, and they are paying the price in terms of their reputation, their credibility, and the weight of their word, and the value of their words, and the value of their promises. This was a political decision. It was not military decision. It was not intelligence decision. We remain grateful to United States people, government, for all they did over the past 20 years. But this one political misjudgment has brought about this fiasco. It wasn't the Taliban who won this war. it was the lack of political will in Washington which led this scramble to happen.
But there is also this aspect of Afghan will. Back in the 90s, the Valley of Five Lions or the Panjshir stood resolute. You stand resolute there along with Ahmad Massoud, leading an armed resistance even now against the Taliban. And there are those who are taking heart from your resistance, Mr. Saleh. But there are reports that the Taliban have now sent hundreds of fighters to the valley. What is the situation? Are you safe?
It's perfect. We are in control. We are on top of the situation. I move around with minimum security. It's the people, and I mean this is an area which has an exceptional reputation.
Yes, it does, Mr. Saleh, and we've seen those visuals, very heartening ones, where you're playing volleyball with some of your people, and you seem to be very, very comfortable in your skin. Thank you very, very much for speaking to us here at CNN News 18. There are many who are taking heart from the resistance that's coming in from Panjshir, led by you. Thank you for speaking to us, Mr. Saleh. So that was the caretaker president of Afghanistan, Amrullah Saleh, who has laid it squarely on Pakistan for enabling the Taliban and on the United States for engaging with the Taliban and giving them credence. Let's go across to our guests this evening and ask them this question. Did Pak engineer this crisis, and did the US know all along? Saleh to News 18 is the hashtag. Saleh on News 18 is the hashtag. Engage with us. Tell us what you think. Your comments are welcome. Let's go across to our panelists. Ambassador G. Parthasarthi with us. Brahma Chalani, strategic thinker and author with us. Lieutenant General KJ Singh is back with us. Former General Officer Commanding-in-Chief, Western Command. And Glenn Carl, former CIA officer and author. Namaste to all of you. Thank you very much. And I would look first start with Ambassador Parthasarthi. Your thoughts on Amrullah Saleh and what he's told us here at CNN News 18.
Well, this is a sad tale. I think it's not the fact that the Americans withdrew. It is the way they negotiated with the Taliban as though they were feeling they had no other option than to withdraw. And in all fairness, it must be said that it was President Biden's predecessor, President Trump, who was prepared to cut and run at all costs. So the logical thing happened and has followed. But it also must be said that the US Army must take the equal blame. If you are providing such sophisticated equipment and arms to a force under training, surely it was your job to see how well trained or motivated they were. That was not done. Or it was a grave misjudgment. So everybody, has a share of the blame, but that happens when situations go so wrong as this. What is important now is for the US, they're not going to come back military, but for the US to have their policies which squeeze the Pakistanis so hard that they feel the pinch. And they should be joined by the European allies. The condition being cut off all supplies and support for the Taliban, and behave yourself. But those sanctions should continue till action is taken. I must add another domestic point. That as it is, the Hazaras were feeling nervous, the Shias. And now some of these actions taken by, I'm told, after this mob took over, have further shaken the Shia population. Iran's leader had warned they will not stand aside if their Shia population were attacked or hurt, which has happened before by the Taliban. So also it's a good thing we have been keeping in touch with Iran, despite American and other displeasure. I'm glad we follow an independent foreign policy. And the question now is, what is Russia going to do with the Central Asian republics that it is pledged to protect?
Correct.
Because Tajikistan, the Tajiks are connected directly to Tajikistan, and they can come in hordes. So
Correct.
It is going to affect stability in Central Asia. And that is why I think the Prime Minister had a very good talk with Mr. Putin. So let's see if we can bring others in.
Where there are
I don't-
multiple
knowing
dynamics
the
that you
Russians
say,
who-
Ambassador Parthasarathy, and we'll get into each of these at length because there are, and it's just the four of you gentlemen today, and it's your thoughts that we'd all want to listen to. But Brahmachalani, somewhere, General KJ Singh was there with us yesterday, and Lieutenant General Singh was saying that there is this Rawalpindi Shura, which will now come into play, and it has been active all along, it looks like, Brahmachalani, and we have given, let's say the US and the other nations have given them enough time to recalibrate their own axis of power and orient themselves with the Chinese and the Turkish. China, Turkey and Iran may just now work with Pakistan.
Well, what India faces is a Taliban, Pakistan, China combined. It's well known that Pakistan, through its proxy Taliban, engineered America's defeat and humiliation in Afghanistan. Yet, unlike Partha's optimism that the US is going to impose some sanctions on Pakistan, I don't think that things are going to be any different now. The US is unlikely to remove Pakistan as its major non-NATO ally. There are only 17 countries that are America's major non-NATO allies. India is not one of them, but countries like Israel, Australia, and Japan are in that list, along with Pakistan and Afghanistan. Despite Afghanistan coming under Taliban's control, thus far, the US has not revoked Afghanistan's status as a major non-NATO ally. And as far as Pakistan is concerned, the Americans have known all along that the Pakistani military and the ISI have been recruiting the foot soldiers for the Taliban. The Taliban leadership has been ensconced in Pakistan all these years. Pakistan funded the Taliban. The Chinese provided arms to the Taliban through Pakistan. These are all well-known facts. And yet the Americans did nothing. Also, consider one other fact. The US has never added the Taliban to its list of foreign terrorist organizations. They still do not regard the Taliban as terrorists. They regard Al-Qaeda and ISIS as terrorist groups, but not the Taliban. The CIA chief going to Kabul to cut some deal with the Taliban tells you a lot about America's troubling equation with this terrorist militia. The Taliban are the world's deadliest terrorists, and yet they don't figure on the US list of terrorist groups. And that tells you a lot about US policy. Today, with Afghanistan under Taliban rule, that country has become Pakistan's protectorate. This has important implications for international security and for Indian security. The Pakistanis have been waging a forever war in Afghanistan since 1974. And that forever war in Afghanistan is an extension of the Pakistani military establishment's ideological commitment to a forever war against India. So it's a forever war against India that created this Pakistani forever war in Afghanistan. Now, unless that forever war of Pakistan does not end in Afghanistan, there will be no peace and stability in Afghanistan despite the Taliban coming to power.
Got it. So you put matters in perspective as to how it affects us and where it all stems. So the epicenter of all of this, the root cause is Pakistan, and not. But whereas the diagnosis was so far being administered in Afghanistan. Before I bring in Glenn Carl and also Lieutenant General KJ Singh, just quickly want to play out that short portion on what Mr. Amrullah Saleh had to say on Pakistan. Who do you blame for the Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan, and why? And what do you think will be the ramifications of Taliban's Kabul takeover, both for Afghanistan and for the world at large? Do you see Afghanistan, and are you apprehensive that Afghanistan could become the breeding ground for terror?
It's very clear. The Taliban were never under pressure in Pakistan. They used Pakistan as a support base. They were not having sanctuaries there. The whole of Pakistan was in the service of the Taliban. United States tried to incentivize the Pakistani cooperation to buy it. The more they paid, it more emboldened the Pakistanis to provide more services and more aid to the Taliban. So the issue of a nuclear state sponsoring terrorism and insurgency against our Western allies and the Afghan state was never addressed.
So let's just get some perspective about how Pakistan propped up the Taliban. They actually engineered and ensured their revival. This was post 2001. Top Taliban leadership fled to Pakistan post the US onslaught that happened. They were allowed the use of madrasas for indoctrination and also raising far more cadre. Not just sanctuary, support too. Recruitment, training ground, Pashtun refugees in Pak, they were roped in. And Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province was openly used to preach radicalism, train, and there is a huge amount of resentment for the kind of operations that were allowed in that region. Quetta Shura, top Taliban leadership body, was based in Pakistan, facilitated funds and shipment of ammunition and fuel to the Taliban. And the likes of Mullah Omar spent a lot of time in Pakistan and in Balochistan operating out of there. It is all documented. Interestingly, as I go across to Lieutenant General KJ Singh in Glencar, with Malik, the former army chief, General Malik tweeted saying, "Do you know who raised the Taliban?" And I'm quoting him. It was Major General Nasirullah Babar, Benazir Bhutto's interior minister. In 1974, Babar, along with the ISI, was tasked to train and fund Tajik rebels, which included Ahmad Shah Massoud. But later he created the Taliban and fondly referred to them as my boys. And do not ever doubt the Taliban ISI Pakistan connection. General KJ Singh, how is it that Pakistan is able to A, berate America, tell them that we are now with China and Turkey and the Americans are to blame, and still eke out billions of dollars from the Americans as aid and be one of their non-NATO allies?
Anand, I am frankly amazed at the naive strategic culture which has been adopted by America. I am really, frankly, I am distressed. I can't believe that a superpower like America and a military which is so professional, I have high regard, I have trained with them, could allow such a thing to happen. See, what has happened? Entire blame for eliminating some of these warlords. Even there is a belief that Mullah Mansoor, who was returning from Iran, was probably compromised by Pakistan intelligence to CIA, and based on that, he was eliminated, and that's how Haibatullah Akhundzada came up. Now, Shamshi base was given to Americans. They were operating drones from there.
Yeah.
All this has happened, and despite that, Taliban is still cozying up to Pakistan. But allow me to tell you, Anand, that these are very temporary arrangements. While in the short term, in the tactical terms, Pakistan has got great amount of euphoria, joy, that they have got this thing going.
Yeah.
But my apprehension is that Pakistan will have to pay for it sooner than later, because if you take your mind back to 1999, 2000, 2001, when Taliban was ruling Afghanistan, at that time, a lot of people in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, which was called Northwest Frontier Province, from frontier agencies like Malakand, Swat and Waziristan and Khyber, they used to take their cases across to Taliban. They never used to take justice here. So if there was a rape, say in Malakand, they took their case to Taliban court across the border, across the Durand line. So here also, before this famous offensive took place, Taliban people were collecting money and extortion. It's a seamless kind of a border. You can put any kind of fencing, but the guys who can't be stopped at LOC by Indian Army, they still manage to sneak through. So Durand line fencing is a very nascent and very elementary kind of defenses which have been put up. So Pakistan should be prepared for surprises. And Pakistan itself, in my perception, is somewhere must be apprehensive and worried.
Yeah.
Because flags have gone up in Lal Masjid, Madarsa. People are euphoric with this idea that you can defeat a superpower. You can claim any kind of victory as long as you are on the path of jihad. So and in Pakistan there are parties like Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pak, which is there, and Khadim Rizvi and all his son and others, they are already into space of fighting elections.
True.
So Pakistan will be, but what I am worried, I would conclude with just this poser, because you have somebody from CIA.
Ji.
What is distressing is like what you flagged, Anand, sophisticated weapons falling into, and they have got satellites. They must be monitoring it.
Yeah.
If nothing else, they should be destroyed. They should not be allowed to be taken to China, reverse engineered. See, China and Iran are past masters in the art of reverse engineering. You're giving these technologies, there are certain elements of stealth, electronic suits, all are falling into the hands. And now, soon they'll be reverse engineered and pitted against America. And this talk of Al-Qaeda not being there and ISIS not being there is a hogwash.
No,
when that Gurdwara was attacked in Kabul,
General Saab, there is tacit acceptance of ISIS and Al-Qaeda present there. In fact, we heard Mr. Saleh saying that a person who facilitated laundering of money between the Al-Qaeda and Taliban is now sitting as a governor of the Central Bank of Afghanistan at this point in time. So this should also be ringing, sending the alarm bells ringing. But General Saab, with your kind permission, I'm going to ask Glenn Carl, because he's heard all the experts and he knows that there is a lot that has been rained against the US, and America is being flayed for its failure at multiple levels. But more importantly, this Pakistan angle. And had you been William Burns, would you be actually enjoying that cup of tea inside with Mullah Baradar? Glenn Carl? Or would you not want to be in those shoes at all?
If I were in Mr. Burns' position, I'm sure that I would be speaking with them. Yeah, but to talk about Pakistan for the moment, Pakistan has been for the United States for decades, ever since its creation. But certainly in the 40 years that I've been involved in the national security establishment, probably the most damning of quote allies unquote. What are the United States' objectives? What have they been for decades with respect to Pakistan and the region? They're larger than anything we ever sought to achieve, despite our investments of men, military, and money in Afghanistan. They are to first try to stop Pakistan from developing nuclear weapons. We didn't succeed. More importantly than that, even, to keep Pakistan and India from going to war and thereby having a war between two nuclear powers, to try to stop Pakistan from supporting terrorism. And I would say, I should have said before that even, to keep Pakistan from shifting ever further towards radicalism and becoming a failed state which might actually be controlled by extremist Islamicists. There's been great concern for many years about the control of the Pakistani nuclear forces. And the assessments are that they are quite secure, but there has been concern for decades that the officer corps, it's understandable that they no longer be educated at Sandhurst, who wants to be educated by the former colonial power, but it has been of concern to the United States that non-commissioned officers in particular and the officer corps have been slowly, progressively affected by radical Islam, by elements of Islam sympathetic to terrorism sometimes. Another of our concerns has been to keep China from making inroads with Pakistan, which would geopolitically be a huge problem. All of these problems have argued, and at the same time, we've sought Pakistan's help, which it can provide in some ways other countries have not been able to, in our efforts globally to fight Islamic terrorists, but separate from the issue of Afghanistan. So all of that has made it a challenge, to say the least, for us to pressure Pakistan with respect to the Taliban and Afghanistan. The harder we press them, the more they get into bed with China, which is the opposite, ultimately, of what the United States seeks for its overarching policy towards Pakistan. So we have been in a position where we cannot really affect them as we wish, can't get them to do what we need, but need them to help us as possible. They've always played a double game. The Americans have been no fools or dupes to that, taking our money and helping us on mutually compatible issues concerning terrorism internationally or directed towards Pakistan, while using our money and our weapons to train, succor, and command, frankly, even the Taliban. But it's been a frustrating situation where we have decided over and over, every president for 40 years, that having some relationship with Pakistan, specifically because of the nuclear problems, is more important than what Pakistan is doing behind our backs towards the Taliban.
But somewhere, don't you think that this nuclear bluff, it's high time that it's called and nations should stop falling for it? Because, sir, you said you wanted India and Pakistan to avoid a war between India and Pakistan, but we fought 2.5 wars. Kargil was a conflict, so that's why I'm saying half a war. You said that you didn't want Pakistan to be able to become a hotbed for jihad and terrorism. It's there. Its army itself is highly radicalized. The ISI itself are highly radicalized and fundamentalist, and they're all churned out of the madrasa systems. There is a university of jihad itself in Pakistan right now. That's how it's infamous. So that objective is also failed. You said you didn't want it to cozy up to China. There's Prime Minister standing today and saying that I've got China and Turkey with me. We don't need America. They are there. The entire CPEC is happening on sovereign Indian territory as claimed by our parliament. And they are the ones backing it. China refuses to even recognize Masood Azhar as a terrorist. Why? Because they are using the Jaish-e-Mohammed mercenaries to guard their CPEC projects, and now the Taliban will be engaged. So all those objectives which the Americans said they wanted to achieve, they're all failed. And today what's happened? Sophisticated weapon systems of the Americans now are in Quetta, and then they will be re-engineered and carted back towards Iran, where again that will go into the hands of the Hamas. And here in China, they will again try and replow that towards trying to, for their machinations in this region. So which objective has then succeeded, other than saying billions of dollars that have gone to the Pakistanis?
Well, it's been a litany of frustrations. There's no question about that. What one hopes it's debatable, but one hopes that the efforts of the U.S. have at least mitigated some of the trends that you described, but they're all very frustrating. I just wrote a piece in Asia, in Japan. I write in Asia, in which I say that I think now that America's Taliban, Afghanistan commitment is ending, that it seems to me clear that our relations with Pakistan will worsen, and that America will feel more able to attempt to pressure Pakistan a bit. And then I also anticipate it goes as a piece that our relations with India will continue their strategic rapprochement, and matters will be clearer that way, since Pakistan now can offer little in the way of necessary help to the U.S. and is doing things that have been frustrating.
But the challenge is greater. I just want to quickly play out, before I go back to Ambassador Parthasarathy and Brahma Chalani and General Singh, what Amrullah Saleh had to say on U.S. He said political will in the White House, that's the reason for Afghanistan in a flux today.
United States, the civilization, it's a global power. It's the mightiest military power on earth, and we never wished them bad. But this shows a single wrong political judgment humiliates a superpower like the United States. It wasn't ever about the American military or about the American intelligence. It was the wrong judgment of the politicians, and I think they have started to pay the price for their wrong decision.
Many watching the broadcast say that America has got it all wrong. They've just got it all wrong, and Pakistan has taken them for a royal ride. Now, more importantly, even with the Trump administration, why recognize and legitimize the Taliban, who've not agreed on anything on the Doha agreement? That agreement itself is one aspect is many believe is ridiculous, but even those which US wants to follow but the Taliban never followed. Let's quickly have a look at that. The commitment was won't allow use of Afghan soil to hurt US security interests, including Al-Qaeda. But right now, the person who was laundering money between Al-Qaeda and Taliban is sitting as the governor of the Central Bank of Afghanistan. Evidence of continuing Taliban-Al-Qaeda links. That's also UN report. Al-Qaeda integrated into Taliban. That's also US intel reports very clearly coming out. We'll start intra-Afghan negotiations. There is no political settlement that is being attempted so far. They are saying we are doing this, but it's not happening. We'll start Taliban fighters are unilaterally who overran Afghanistan. A lot of them were part of the Pakistan military too. Permanent ceasefire to be on the agenda of intra-Afghan negotiations. Multiple attacks against Afghan government officials. And then there is a standoff which is already happening in the Panjshir and Baghlan. So at various levels, the agreements which they talked about, what they will do, did not happen. The 5,000 prisoners who they said should be released. Again, Amrullah Saleh, Ambassador Parthasarathi says, US said that we will freeze aid if you don't release 5,000 people. That's the first division. So, what was going on and who was thinking, or there was no thought at all? Can you just leave a nation and an entire region in a flux like this and say it's all done? Okay, you may blame the Trump administration, Ambassador Parthasarathi, but the Biden administration followed it through.
I'm not blaming just the Trump administration.
Yes, sir. Go ahead, please. Go ahead, Ambassador Parthasarathi. Please go ahead.
I'm not blaming just the Trump administration. I think Biden is equally responsible. He is equally irresponsible, if I may use the term. The U.S. Army, as I said, should surely have seen to it that the taxpayers' money being paid for arms supplied to the Afghan army was properly utilized by properly trained people. It's been a failure of leadership everywhere. And just, one more thing in response to Brahma, this time they have frozen some accounts they claim, the Americans have frozen some accounts they claim relate to the Taliban. And finally, you said celebrations which are taking place in the US. I recall when I was in Pakistan, they started celebrating when Kargil began. And they wept when it was over. So the Pakistanis sometimes are too given to being taken away by their military because the impression being given is the Afghans won't fight back. Now, anybody who studied history knows the Afghans don't surrender. And I'd like to add one more thing, last thing, which is political support. I think the Russians will have to look again because Central Asian countries are feeling threatened, and we'll have to review their policies. So I think I'll leave it at that.
No, true. But Mr. Brahmachalani, would you agree with Ambassador Parthasarathi, or would you want to see more from America now that their engagements or their commitments to Pakistan are done with, as Glenn Carl was saying? Should there be further more immediate sanctions? Should they block any more release from the IMF? $14 billion between 2010 and 2015. They already sent about $39 to $40 billion. Trump said that he's going to freeze some of that money. They are there in the grey list. They want to emerge out of that. There's so many other things. But if we really want to stifle them, we can.
Well, ask yourself, is the US supporting moving Pakistan from FATF's grey list to the blacklist? Are they supporting that? Are they going to be dropping Pakistan as a major non-NATO ally? Are they willing to withhold loans to Pakistan from the IMF, World Bank, and Asian Development Bank? Are they willing to target select ISI and army officers with sanctions? The US lists 4 countries as state sponsors of terrorism: Iran, Sudan, Syria, and North Korea. But not Pakistan, which has engineered America's humiliating defeat in Afghanistan. The US added Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps to its list of foreign terrorist organizations. Why doesn't the US add ISI? If Iran's IRGC is a terrorist organization, certainly the ISI, that rogue agency of the Pakistan military, is definitely a terrorist organization. So unless the Americans are willing to act, Pakistan will not change. The Americans have all the power to change Pakistan's behavior. But over the decades, they have winked at Pakistan's nuclearization. They have turned a blind eye to Pakistan's use of terrorism as an instrument of state policy. And even after their humiliating rout in Afghanistan, I don't think US policy toward Pakistan will change, for the simple reason that the reason why the Americans value Pakistan, and that is the most critical aspect of in the US-Pakistan relationship, the greatest value of Pakistan for the US is the fact that Pakistan plays a balancing role on the Indian subcontinent. Without Pakistan, India will enjoy preeminence on the subcontinent. So even though India is a close friend of the US, Pakistan's balancing role on the subcontinent is something that the American policymakers still value. But look at it, the bigger picture as to what has happened in Afghanistan. The Biden administration has effectively installed the Taliban in power. They pulled the rug out from under the feet of the Afghan military. They disabled the Afghan Air Force's planes and helicopters by suddenly withdrawing 18,000 civilian contractors, leaving the Afghan military high and dry, and empowering the Taliban. By empowering the Taliban, the Biden administration has empowered all jihadist groups across the world, thus promising the rebirth of global terror. And by betraying one ally, the elected Afghan government, they have made other US allies feel that they too could be betrayed when they most need American support.
Trust, credibility, and dependence.
Great damage to US alliances and to US credibility in the world.
Well, we will deliberate on this in the coming days. Always a pleasure to speak to very, very august minds like yourselves. But I've run out of time today, gentlemen. Thank you very, very much, Ambassador Parthasarathy, Brahma Chalani, Lieutenant General KJ Singh, and Glenn Carr. We're going to wind up debate number 1 on that note, ladies and gentlemen. Saleh to News18 and the dynamics that it unfolds. Are we now going to look at the next few years of flux in this entire region and also globally? We'll have to wait and watch. But when we come back after the break, we come closer home and talk about a mega growth initiative. It's the National Monetization Pipeline, and it is Vice Chairman Niti Aayog, Dr. Rajiv Kumar, who will be joining us. Stay with us.